What is going on, everybody? We are live across three different platforms. And as you can see, the title of this session is going to be ConCon recording teaser. Yes, y'all. Because of some back end things, we wanted to make sure that we did things right as it pertains to the consciousness conference. And so we pulled back and we're going to avail our speakers to be able for us to collect recordings from their talks and provide those to you as an offering at a later date. But wanted to continue with the first of the month cadence that we had for the C3 community and bring on a couple speakers. And so one of our speakers that was going to be for this conference is Mr. Paul Ward. And so Paul has an amazing title that he likes to call himself. Calls himself the consciousness whisperer. And before we get into that, I always want to shout out Karen Huller, the co-creator of the C3, the corporate consciousness co-op, the LinkedIn group that we're all a part of. And all her amazing work on the back end with Cynthia and Selena and all of those who are making the back end stuff work. But Paul, you've been a friend of C3 and a co-creator and co-collaborator and co-conspirator, all those things for a good while now. Introduce yourself to the audience again, and then we'll get into a brief conversation about your segment as a part of the ConCon community.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. Great to be with you today. Thank you. So I'm Dr. Paul Ward, and today I'm calling in from West Palm Beach in Florida. I've been living down here by the beach for a while, but I spend time here and time in England. I have a home in Portsmouth in England as well. So I go back and forth a lot less frequently than I used to, but I do. The nice thing about today's world is it's a virtual world, and it really doesn't matter whether I'm in England or in Florida. I can jump on and have conversations regardless. All I have to do is remember the time changes. And so I'm here in Florida. My focus in terms of work is on coaching clients. So I coach clients, leadership clients, and also people in transition to the second half of life. So two parallel activities that I bring together under the consciousness banner. I'm also on the University of Phoenix faculty teaching leadership for doctoral students. So that's what keeps me busy.
Nice. Well, and one of the things that has been an amazing surprise going on this consciousness journey is meeting so many different leaders and so many different facets and spices and varieties of life. When did you start becoming intentional about the work that you did in this conscious leadership space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I trace it back to the year 2000, and that was a year I met Richard Barrett. And Richard's also a Brit. I met him in the US. He was living in North Carolina then, and he's very focused on values. Created the Value Center and developed the 7 levels of consciousness that is very focused on values built on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So that was where I think I sort of really started looking at consciousness. And then, I took a meandering journey through a PhD and various other things. And then coming forward to about 7 years ago, I met John Renish in California, and he was, as far as I can see, he's the one that I would attribute to coining the phrase conscious leadership. I've seen I've got his book. I haven't found anything that precedes that. It's over 20 years ago, but that's. So I got to know John quite well, and we were working in an organization called Future Shapers, really trying to develop conscious leadership at the senior level in organizations. And then having, sort of developed a more deeper understanding with John, I started to do coaching and workshops and started to build a framework for, for teaching and coaching around conscious leadership. And from there, came to realize I needed to write a book, and wrote the book, The Inner Journey to Conscious Leadership, which was published in 2018. And I've really continued the journey since then.
Man, thank you so much for doing that backdrop. And for those that have never heard the topic, we try to tell y'all we did not make this up. Conscious leadership has been around for quite some time, and so thank you for going there. And I know your segment and your session is actually from your book, The Inner Journey to Conscious Leadership. And where was that manifested from? Was that or your own journey, or a journey just on the road to teaching leadership well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I developed the framework for the book, which turned out to the book. I was working on workshops, particularly workshops, because we always need a framework if we're going to deliver workshops. And I was doing half day and all day workshops. And so I built a framework around three themes, really about awareness, about intention, and about action. So AIA, awareness, intention, action. And so I sort of, that was the original simple framework. And then in each of those themes, I developed three practices. Um, and I can go through all of those, and I will in the presentation. There's a
Yeah,
lot
give
of
him a teaser. Give him a
yeah.
teaser.
Yeah, so, when I think about noticing, for example, noticing what's going on is one of the first practices. So, noticing, first of all, what's going on inside, what's going on inside ourselves. It's a good place to start. Noticing what's going on in others, the people we're interacting with, the people we're working with, and then noticing what's going on in the environment. We've just have COP26 coming to an end, and so the environment is huge. I mean, that's the worldwide environment, planetary, if you like, but it's also the environment we work in. Our employers, our organizations. So noticing is an important first step. One of the other themes under intention is about purpose, and
Mm,
I'm one of those people that is hopefully very purpose driven. Help clients, define what their purpose might be. We all have a purpose, but how do we describe it?
mhm.
So exploring purposefully is one of the other practices. So there are altogether there are 10.
Yeah.
9 specific practices, 3 in each theme. And then people often ask, so where's the 10th practice?
Mhm.
Well, the 10th practice, maybe we'll keep that one until we
Keep
meet.
it under wraps. Keep it under wraps. Don't well, in a couple things that you pointed to, particularly, I'm one of those people who, kind of put the posters into practice, particularly around this idea of awareness, right? Over the last, I would say, 18 months, people have been, becoming falling in love with self-awareness and all the rest of these things. But I like what something that you said in awareness as it's kind of traditionally defined, but you taking it to the step of noticing. Can you give kind of that just nuance of noticing?
Yeah, and so the phrase I use is listening with all the senses.
Mm,
So, we listen with our ears, some of us better than others, but
mhm,
listening's a really important characteristic of any leader. And there's been active listening and deep listening and all those good things, but listening with all the senses is about listening with more than our ears. And for me, it's about listening with all of our body. And we know when we're in a situation, there are times when the body tells us things. When we feel excited, that the sort of tingling across the back, the hairs come up. When we're frightened of something, the pit of the stomach tightens up. And if we're attentive to what's happening in our body, when someone's talking to us, uh, we're listening to somebody, listening with all the senses gives us a real deep sense of what's really going on. What's really going on? As I say, and it starts inside because it's how I'm reacting. I don't know how the other person is reacting. They may be having a completely different experience, but I know how I'm reacting. So really noticing can give us a real sense of, okay, this is what's happening to me. So I can manage that then. If I know what's happening, I can respond rather than react. We all know about reacting. We're all good at reacting. The email comes in that upsets us, and off we go, writing something and firing off a reactive reply, and then 2 minutes later we go, "I wish I hadn't sent that." Well, if we're noticing, we may take a pause. I call it a purposeful pause, and sometimes I'll leave it 24 hours before I respond to that sort of email. So it is about, just being aware, taking the right time, and then responding appropriately. So that's a way of thinking about noticing with all the senses, which is a little different than some people might think about as just listening.
Yeah. And it's amazing that all the words that I was processing, you said about noticing. And one in particular, when you think about noticing and listening with all the senses, there's this sense of you got to be slow to speak. There's a pause. There's time that you give yourself, and it's almost when you do it that way, Paul, it's almost like a permission that you
Mm.
give yourself to say, hey, what's going on with you, right? And it's like, okay, is what I see the reality, or am I filtering it with my eyes and I'm telling myself a story? But then, okay, now my ears, what'd you hear? Right. And you begin to go through these gates, or however it does, in listening with all the senses. And again, what's the feeling that I'm getting and what is it telling me? Right? What's the story that I'm beginning to conjure up, right? Your reaction to that email that you see. And again, it's amazing how in words we can apply tone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the tone's missing from the email, right?
It's missing from the email, but we apply tone, we imply intent, we imply, I mean, the levels of aggression and all these other things to just words. And all the message said is come see me.
Right, that's right. Yeah, yeah. But I appreciate your comment on slowing down. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that uh, my clients give me feedback on in terms of coaching is creating space in the coaching conversation. So spaciousness in a conversation is just so important, because typically we're all guilty of this. We sit in a situation, group, or meeting, or even a one-to-one, and we're not listening. We're not listening to the other person. We're thinking about what we're going to say next. And so having the space, and we practice this in our gatherings at times, is that in between speakers, there's a breath. Before you speak, just take a deep breath. It may be your turn, it's fine. Or take a deep breath and then start to speak. That's very easy to do, and it just creates the space. It slows things down and enables people to listen rather than to be worrying about what they're going to say next. So that's another part of really being mindful about what's going on.
I love that. And I am so, as a person who tries to practice again more awareness, more self-manage ways to self-manage, like that's what you just talked through, right? It's that space that if you don't practice it as a coach, practice giving yourself space, practice kind of that distance from what you just came out of. You have a tendency to pull forward all the emotion, all the stuff
Right.
from thing to thing to thing. And before you know it, you're a runaway train,
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, mentally. And one thing that I love that early in 2021 that I got exposed to was this idea of positive intelligence, right?
Mm.
And just this noticing, right? The sage saboteur thing, Shirzad and several other authors who have dug into this work. But one of the things, just what you described there, Paul, is that just that distance. And I started having, I call them meeting starters. Is and it all it is my pause,
Mm.
my 1 to 2 minute created space to just quiet the noise, And that way, to me, it's the preparation I need to show up well for the next client, for the next thing, and mitigate as much as possible some, debris, if you will. If it was a
Mhm.
contentious meeting or whatever session I came out of, you mitigate how much of that is carryover, right? And I think that, because it gets to that second part of intention and your connection to purpose. What why is and again, and I've heard it briefed so many different ways, but what makes purpose the thing as it pertains to intention?
Yeah, so there are a number of teachers around purpose. My longest serving teacher on purpose is Richard Leider, who wrote The Power of Purpose. And I was fortunate to go to Tanzania, to Africa, on what he referred to as an inventure. This was back in 2009. And so an inventure was, of course, the adventure of going on a safari. It was a walking safari across the Serengeti. But the inventure, the in part, was the inner journey. And so, yeah, it is around purpose that, and his definition is about why. Why'd you get up in the morning? Why'd you get up? What gets you up? Um, and another, of course, particularly in the business world, on purpose, and starting with why, of course, is Simon Sinek. A great inspiration. I was fortunate to meet Simon a few years ago at a conscious capitalism conference. And yeah, so just thinking about why we are here, why do we show up? All of those things can get us very clear. And the point about having a clear purpose is you can test your actions against it. Am I really? Because it's not only about having a purpose, it's about living purposefully. It's checking, whatever am I doing? Am I living through that purpose right now? And for me, I'm actually taking that right now, a level further. So I'm working with the Purpose Guides Institute. Um, and the Purpose Guides Institute is really about discovering your really deep purpose. So we can have I'm working with Jonathan Gustin, and he talks about three levels: a default purpose, a created purpose, and a soul purpose, a soul level purpose. And our default purpose is is our inherited purpose, what we grow up with, what we get from our parents and our growing up. And then created purpose is, what which I've worked on with a lot of clients is, how would you describe your purpose? And for me, that's worked well. But a deeper level purpose is really, really going deeper into the real reason you're here, and discovering as he calls it, a soul level purpose. And that's a journey I'm on right now. But purpose then allows us to say, okay, this is where I'm headed. And is what I'm doing, is my behavior aligned with that purpose? And am I living purposefully? And then that links a little bit further with intention in terms of how we show up. How do we
Wow.
show up in the world? How do we show up in meetings? And that for me is about intention. And a lot of people think about intention as goals and objectives, and goals and objectives are essential. But
Hmm.
I like to think about intention as much more about, how do I show up? How do I
Hmm.
show up in a coaching conversation? How do I show up on this screen today? And being more consciously showing up in a certain way. I may have had, just before this call, a really emotional conversation with a partner, and I may be coming on the call feeling, quite emotional. But can I then say, okay, I'm going to show up in this way? I'm going to show up curiously, with curiosity, or am I going to show up with inspiration? How am I going to show up in this situation? And the human capability to switch is incredible.
Yeah.
We switch our emotions in an instant, and so we do it negatively a lot. But can we do
Mhm.
it positively? That for me is about intention.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was funny as you were describing that. That's how I was getting it. Right. Because again, one of the things I say in my coaching sessions, and one of the things early on in my coaching process was to write this acronym for myself of wait. why am I talking? And that was all
Mm,
around motive and intent of what I was about to ask. Who is this question for? And to me, it was about the emotion and feeling evoked by the mindset of why I was asking a certain. Was it me prying? Was it me leading towards an outcome, or what it was? But I love what you said there, particularly around this idea that inner journey of why. And
mm,
I think when and there's something I said in my TEDx, it was like if we woke up tomorrow and you had to go do a thing and you never got paid for it, but you extremely excited about it, that's your thing, right? And it's like, how can you multiply more of that thing? And that's the guiding thing. And is I'm glad you're on this conscious journey of, okay, what does this look like for me? Oh, and churning. And one thing that I've come to notice in COVID, I think kind of helped point me in this direction of not only noticing, but sitting with what does this season of life need me to be?
mm, mm,
What do the spaces that I'm desiring to be involved in and connected to in this season of life need from me? And I think that's informing my PhD work in the conversation around full range leadership and being able to
mm,
navigate the flows of spaces and all the rest of those things. And so kind of as a thought, and I love that you brought up this conscious capitalism conference, because one of the things that we wanted people to get from this ConCon leadership conference, it wasn't just about, we all get together, we hold hands, sing kumbaya around the fire, cooking virtual marshmallows, but there's a connection to people, the planet, and profit. At the end of the
right.
day, when you think about how you help clients deploy this from a business context, what's some things you've helped clients with?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the business part. So I've been involved in conscious capitalism. I tend to use the word conscious business more often because of the negative connotation of capitalism and the misunderstanding, I think, of capitalism. And I'm a great supporter of conscious capitalism and the organization. I've been involved for a long time, but conscious business just is for me a better phrase. So I've used that. My personal focus is on leadership. So I'm very focused on conscious leadership. I love working with individual leaders, but leaders lead organizations. And so you can't lead, you can't coach leaders without coaching their organizations. So having a conscious business, a conscious organization is really important. And one of the big philosophies for that really came out of the original Conscious Capitalism book by John Mackey and Raj Sisodia was this idea of multiple stakeholders. And that's one, when you look at capitalism, I mean, the downside of capitalism that it's very focused on the shareholder. And that's where people get uncomfortable today. Some anyway. Now, some people are quite happy that it's focused on just the shareholder, but the multiple stakeholder, really, that concept is so important today that it's not just the shareholder, but it's the customer, it's the supplier. So I'm working with a vice president of supply chain right now. So we're looking at the whole of the supply chain, and that's all the multiple stakeholders there. It's about employees. It's about the community that you're working in. And if we as leaders really think about multiple stakeholders, then we're serving a broader community. That's not to say that we don't have to make money. We do. I mean, business is in it. We're in business to make a profit. No point if we're not in a profit, we're not in business, and we're not making a contribution. So it's not about not making money. It's about serving multiple stakeholders, and that whole thing about again being aware of all those different aspects for me is important, and creating a more conscious and aware culture in organizations. And a lot of that's up to leaders to be role models and really create those more conscious cultures. So those just a few thoughts in the book. I did create a chapter on conscious business. I focused on leadership, but I didn't want to leave conscious business out. So yeah, it's a really interesting aspect. So yeah, I think conscious business, conscious capitalism, all really very important.
I love that. I love that. And as we were opened up talking about Karen. Here she is.
Hi,
Karen,
Karen.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Good, good, good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
yeah. So Paul just got finished answering the people and profits question, and from the business angle. So I'm so glad that he's actually a part of another network that we may be able to find opportunities to partner in the future. Um,
Co-creation. So it's all about.
Co-creation. We got to
Yeah.
plug. We got to plug through Paul. All right.
All right.
Well, Karen, anything that you want to share, because we were coming towards on the backside of it before I let Paul point people towards his book. Be on the lookout for his recording through ConCon and all of that. So anything you would like to share with the community of folks?
Of course. Of course. I've been rushing around a lot today, so you have to allow me to let my thoughts settle. I think what I learned through this process of planning ConCon is just the piece of giving it your best effort and then surrender. Um, Surrendering to the process and allowing. And I'm so grateful to all of the leaders who has said, yes, ConCon's a great idea. We should definitely all get together and talk about conscious leadership and share our ideas and share our secret sauce and share what's worked and what hasn't worked and just admit it. We're all here just learning together, you know. The humility of that all is inspiring. Anybody can jump in, you know, wherever you're at right now. You can always raise raise yourself another level, expand, always something to learn, and that's what I love about this growing community. We've added a bunch of people to the C3 community, people who are like us, co-creators, you know, committed to a more conscious corporate landscape, um, and that's exciting. I'm so filled with excitement about possibilities in the future.
Love it. Love it. So Karen, I appreciate you, and I know Paul does as well. And so those of you out there not connected to the C3 community, please get connected. I'm going to provide links in our chat because ConCon, even though the live session is not there, we're going to have some live opportunities for you to see some other speakers and panelists and some of the keynotes. But we're also going to set up the recording library of all of our speakers who have lent their time, their effort, their talent, and all of the amazing things, platinum nuggets they were going to drop, will still be available to you via the recording in the library. So when that gets released, make sure you avail yourself to that. And again, one of the things that Karen and I have been talking about is, what does this community look like for 2022? What does partnership look like and co-creation look like for 2022? And so we're excited about our connections with the Academy of Creative Coaching, IPEC Coaching, and leaders like Paul and Mark and Jay and everybody out there who Tawana, all of these other amazing speakers who have availed their themselves to our community. So stay tuned. More to come, more to follow. Jump in where you fit in, and we'll be conscious and creative together. So, Paul, thank you once again for just availing yourself this afternoon. Karen, as always, thank you for being amazing, and checking in on the crew as you always do. So, more to follow, folks. Connect with us, grow with us, and be a part. It's a participation sport, right? It's contact. Conscious leadership is all about contact. All right, folks. Have a great one. We'll talk to you all soon.